Hi, my name's Amelia. I've been asked to do an assessment which requires me to identify 25 native plant species, 5 bushland weeds and 3 plant families. But before I do that assessment, I'm required to do a toolbox talk to talk about the site which I'm going to be basing my assessment in. And also the hazards that I might encounter, the hazard controls, and also the tools, materials and equipment that I will need to complete the ID assessment and how I will pack them into my bag. So I'm going to be basing my field trip in Sydney Park, which is in Sydney's inner west. It's Gadigal land, and it's in sort of between St. Peter's and Alexandria. It's my local bushland park, and it's mostly been planted, but there has been a lot of regeneration efforts over the last decade or so. So there are some work health and safety hazards which I need to be aware of before I go to the park. I've made some notes here, so if you see me referring to this, it's just so I don't miss anything. So the first one is slips, trips and falls. So you need to be aware of slippery surfaces, uneven ground, cliff edges, unstable riverbanks, and slopes as well. So there could be some very slopey areas. Another important one is falling tree limbs. So obviously if you've got some big trees, overhanging branches, they could be a potential hazard. Another one is vegetation. So you can be exposed to, say, prickly plants or spiky branches, thorns, things like that, which can cut, graze you. But also there are some plants out there, some toxic plants that can give you an allergic reaction. Whether it's the sap or bristles or hairs on the plant. Another really important one is animals, so wild animals, insects, spiders, things like that. You've got ants, jumping ants, green ants, bees, wasps, ticks and leeches, and sometimes flies as well. Exposure to weather. So doing a plant ID outdoors, you could be exposed to any kinds of weather. So you've got rain, extreme heat, extreme cold, UV exposure, and also heat exhaustion. Another thing you may come across doing plant ID is rubbish. So you could be exposed to contaminants, bacteria with rubbish, but also sharp objects like glass, needles, especially in the inner west. You know, we see a lot of waste like that. And also sometimes you see asbestos, which has been dumped from housing, old housing and things like that. You also need to be aware of soil contaminants. So if you breathe in or if you get soil in your eyes, that can also be a potential hazard. Another thing around here, unfortunately, is noise. So aircraft noise, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this inside today and not outdoors, is because there's traffic noise, there's train noise, there's aircraft noise, there's wind noise, but often you may find someone's chainsawing or brush cutting near you. So they're things to take into consideration. Manual handling is another one. So you just have to be aware of your posture. There's always the chance of injuring your back, pulling and pushing, overreaching. You also want to make sure that you're using your tools in the correct way to avoid things like RSI. And another very important one is dehydration. So, you know, obviously if you're out in the field for a long time, you have to make sure that you're drinking ample amounts of water. So they're the hazards. And now I'll talk about the ways we can kind of mitigate risk and control our environment so that we don't injure ourselves or come across any problems when these hazards arise. Okay, so for our first hazard, which is slips, trips and falls, the main thing we want to do is to be very aware of our environment, step with caution, and just keep an eye out for any uneven surfaces, any slippery surfaces. You want to make sure that you stay a good distance, around 5 meters away from a cliff edge. And if you see like an unstable riverbank or something like that, just to stay away from that area. It's also really important to have the correct footwear. So you want sturdy boots. If you can, a steel cup is good, just to protect your toes. And yeah, I think the best thing is to just be really aware of your surroundings. The next one is falling tree limbs. So you want to make sure you look up above you before you start any work. If there are any kind of dead looking branches or unstable looking branches, just to try and move away from that area and work somewhere else, especially if it's windy. Because that's when we start getting falling branches and then you can get badly injured. Sometimes in my job, it actually helps to wear a hard hat if, you know, it's unavoidable to be working in that area. The third one, vegetation. There's a lot of different things we can do for this. So you need to really look at the clothes that you're wearing, especially if you're going into an area in really, really thick brush. So you want to wear a long sleeve shirt, you want to wear long pants, boots, thick socks. If you can, you know, sometimes it's useful to kind of tuck your pants into your socks, tuck your sleeves into your gloves, just so that you have minimal skin exposed. It's helpful to wear sunglasses. You can avoid getting, you know, a branch or a stick in your eye. And also really important to kind of be aware of the toxic plants in the area, things that you can get a reaction from, you know, like saps, hairs, bristles, thorns, things like that. And to have a first aid kit on hand. And that includes having things in it like antihistamines, that can, you know, stop you from having an allergic reaction, and also being aware of where the closest hospital is, you know, in case you do have a bad reaction that, you know, isn't responding to antihistamines. And also just to make your supervisor know that if you have any, you know, allergies that will potentially be life-threatening or something that you will need to go to hospital for. With animals, spiders and insects, there are a few things we can do. We want to, obviously, same thing, we bring our PPE, long sleeves, long pants, boots, gloves. We want to avoid ants' nests at all costs. They can often be under rocks, at the base of plants. Avoiding bee and wasp nests. Obviously no handling wild animals. And then if you're picking up things like big rocks, logs, thick vegetation, you want to kind of have a good look before you're putting your hands in anywhere. Things like bees, jumping ants, they can actually get you through your gloves. So yeah, you want to be really careful if those sorts of insects are going to be in the area that you're working. You've got to have a first aid kit on site, insect repellent, protective clothing. Another really important thing is to be aware of the first aid around snakes and spider bites. Tick removal kits are really important, and you can also treat your clothes that you're wearing for ticks. So using pyrethrum, you can soak your clothes in them, and then if you're going into an area where there are going to be ticks, that kind of is an extra layer of protection. Yeah, so the next one, exposure to the weather. Again, I think we're going to go through the clothing PPE quite a bit. Long sleeve, long pants. That's going to protect you in the cold. In the heat, it's going to stop you from getting sunburnt. Wearing a hat, wearing sunglasses, using sunblock and reapplying after 2 hours. Rain jackets in the rain. Warm clothing in winter. And then it's really important to have regular rest breaks, drinking small amounts of water regularly to avoid overheating and dehydration. And then just keeping an eye on the weather, so avoiding working in extreme heat, extreme cold, really heavy rain, things like that. So at my job, we don't work when it's over 40 degrees. And even in those conditions, we do much lighter duties when it's really, really hot. And just, yeah, taking regular breaks, going into the car to warm up if it's really cold, things like that. So rubbish, it's always very important to wear gloves. Trying to avoid picking up rubbish with your hands, so you can get a rubbish grabbing stick, making sure that you dispose of it carefully. Sometimes you'll need to kind of clear an area around a plant that you want to ID, so you want to kind of move that stuff out the way before you move closer to the plant. It's important to have a Sharps container to put any used syringes in. And then first aid, and being aware of where the nearest hospital is in case you get a needle stick injury. And yeah, so that's important. Soil contaminants, again, you want to wear gloves, you want to wear protective eyewear, sunglasses. Washing your eyes if soil gets in your eyes, because that can lead to issues. And also just knowing areas of contamination. So for example, where I'm going, Sydney Park, it used to be a tip, and so even though they have been replacing the soil and it's generally healthy to a depth, if you are digging lower than say 25 centimeters, they require us to wear a gas meter on our shirts. And that's to tell us if we're reaching a level where there's methane or carbon dioxide. And so in that area, if we're pulling out a weed that we know is going to have a very deep taproot, we usually will leave it there. We'll cut it and paint it, because by pulling that weed up, we could pull up soil that is contaminated. So just being aware if you're in a site like that, and if you can avoid it and work somewhere else, that's good, or having ways to kind of mitigate the risk of coming into contact with contaminants. Noise, again, is a big thing around here. You can try and avoid areas where there is noise. Wearing earplugs. There are some earplugs that will cancel out background noise, but you can still listen to hazards close by you. You can listen to instructions from your supervisor, things like that. Manual handling, just being aware of the best ways to be bending, lifting things, twisting, just to make sure that you don't injure yourself. It's important to take regular breaks, do some stretches, especially to your back. That's one of the places that there are a lot of injuries. Wrists, and yeah, just stretching before and after you do an activity, or before or after the field trip would be really helpful. And the same thing goes for correct tool use. So you don't want to develop RSI from using a tool incorrectly. So checking with a supervisor, going on YouTube, learning about how to use that tool correctly so you don't injure yourself. And dehydration, we kind of touched on that just before, but it's really important to make sure that you have an ample amount of water for the task that you're doing. So being aware of how long a task will take. I would assume that being in the field, I will be out there for a couple of hours, so I want to have enough water to last me for that time. Or if you can't carry that much water in, just knowing that there is a place that you can refill your water. And it's important to kind of have between half a litre to a litre of water per hour of moderate activity. So now I'm going to show you some different tools, equipment, resources, materials that I'll be using to carry out my plant ID. The first resource I want to show you is the Field Guide to Native Plants of Sydney by Les Robinson. This is an essential resource. It uses a botanical key in order to identify plants, which basically takes you through a series of 2 questions which you work towards to slowly narrow down the species that you're trying to ID. It has illustrations so you can cross-reference and check that you are identifying the correct species. Another one which I think will really come in handy, since I plan to be looking at a lot of grasses, so the Poaceae family, is grasses of coastal New South Wales, and that's from the Department of Primary Industries from the New South Wales government. It's very, it's got a lot of different species in it. It's very handy. And grasses for me are a difficult thing to ID, so I think this will come in handy. The next thing is a loop or a hand lens. This is just very handy. You can put it in your pocket and it will magnify whatever you're looking at. So if it's a leaf, a flower, fruits, capsules, even soil, and sometimes that will help narrow down your identification. I also really like to bring a tape measure. You can bring a ruler, but I find tape measure a little bit handier if you're measuring things like a width of a tree, width of a branch, things like that, so things that aren't flat. And that can be really helpful in narrowing down the ID of a plant. Another thing you'll need is a phone, which I'm using to record this. So they're very important for things like taking photos, and it's really important to take photos of close-ups of the plant, close-ups of different parts of the plant like leaves, flowers, fruit. Also taking photos of plants in situ and soil, different things to help you remember and refer to later when you're IDing. But you will also need your phone for things, apps like PlantNet, iNaturalist, which are great resources to be able to identify plants. You can also find groups on Facebook. I'm part of a group called Native Plants of Australia, Native Plants of New South Wales, something like that. And there are lots and lots of people on there that are absolutely fantastic at IDing plants. And it kind of gives you a resource where you can consult with a number of different people and kind of get to the right answer if you're having trouble IDing a plant. You will also need a notebook. Sometimes people like to use their notes app in their phone. I like notebooks. And pens as well. That comes in handy, just to record things that you're seeing. Especially if it's an area where you're not allowed to take samples. So it may be difficult to recall things, say once you're back at your house and you're trying to remember certain things about the plant. If you do have permission to take samples, a really good piece of equipment, secateurs, that helps you cut off leaves, flowers, which you can take home and refer to later in order to ID. It's important to make sure that they're sharp, they're clean, and that you've disinfected them before you go into the field. If you are taking plant samples, it's really good to have a number of Tupperware containers, ones with good lids that seal, so that you can take them home, they don't get damaged, and you can look at them later. And then as well as that, to have some labels. You can stick them on top of the Tupperware containers, write down what species you think it is, or have a, say, reference number to a photo in your phone. Another really important thing is to have a map. Some people like to use a actual physical map, Google Maps, a GPS app, just to make sure that you know where you're going. For me, I'm lucky, this is my local park, so you know, I know it like the back of my hand, but if you are going into a more remote area, it's really important to have a map. And now I will show you how I will organize and pack all of my equipment. So I really like to have all of my tools on a tool belt, all the things I need to be handy. Just means that I can wear it around my waist and they're easily accessible. So the things I'll have on my tool belt for plant ID, firstly I want my hat. Sometimes you need to take that on and off if you're going into bushland, so it's good to have that where you can grab it easily. Gloves, you want to be able to take them on and off easily. Secateurs. Got my loop in this pocket. And tape measure. So they're all things that I'll need to grab fairly quickly. Usually will keep my phone in my back pocket so that I can grab that easily. So what I'll do is usually just check the weather. I'll keep my raincoat on me regardless because weather can change quickly, but if rain's not likely, I'll just keep that at the bottom of my backpack. I usually then will put my tool belt in with the back facing my back so it's not uncomfortable. Put that in next. Just make sure everything's tucked in. Then I will put my water bottle in, usually down one side. And then my books, put them in front of the tool belt. I usually put my labels inside the cover of one of my books just to keep it flat. The containers, they can go in front of the books. And then on top, I'll put my sunglasses, my notebook. That's all in the front of the bag. And then in the front, the main part of the bag, and then in the front of the bag, I will have things like my sunblock. So I've got body sunblock, face sunblock, both 50 plus, and yep. So put that in, make sure everything's zipped up, and then put that on my back, both shoulders, and then you just adjust the strap just to make sure it's comfortable, and then you're done.